Hey College Success, this is your video for your Chapter 2 lecture. So I have the Chapter 2 text up and running in the background here, and then here are the Chapter 2 slides. So I will use the slides as the main basis for this lecture. So Chapter 2 starts talking about knowing yourself as a learner. So early on in the semester, it's helpful to kind of know some of your learning preferences, the way that you learn and take in information, and how that can be beneficial to you as a student. So here is the outline of all the things that the chapter talks about. And as Chapter 1 did, this is kind of like a self-interest, self-check to see, where you stand with some of these. Is learning easy for you? Do you have a preferred learning style? Do you have difficulty staying with something once you learn it, or have trouble learning with it? And do you think teachers are your most significant aspect of your learning? So that's just, how do you answer these questions right now at the beginning of the chapter? And then those same questions will be posed again at the end of the chapter to see if maybe you have different answers or you view them in any different capacity. So again, this slide kind of just talks about what to expect from the chapter contents so that you know what to spend a little bit more time in as you go into the textbook on your own. All right, so here are some in the first section, just things to think about. Do you know what happens when you're learning? Do you approach your learning differently depending on kind of your goal at the end? Do you know about the different types of learning? So just knowing about yourself as a learner, we're going to talk about a couple assessments here in just a few moments that you can figure out if you don't know how your learning preferences are. So how do you take in information? How do you know when you learn information that it's accurate? And all the things that can influence our learning. So our attitude and motivation are actually some of the biggest things that can impact how and when or how much we learn of something. So if we have very little motivation to learn, I think this is probably common sense. Like if we're not motivated to learn something, odds are we're not going to learn it, right? If we don't feel like there is a need for it, we don't feel like we're working towards something overall, it's going to be very difficult. Interest is another thing that plays a very large role in our learning. And so all of these things influence our attitude toward maybe the class, the teacher, the concepts, whatever it might be, the types of learning, our preferences, all of those things go into thinking about these learning styles. And so this is just like an example of the different types of learning that we could be doing. This is related to Bloom's taxonomy, the different ways of understanding things. Would you consider yourself like a motivated learner? So what motivates you? It's still fairly early in the semester, so we want to be kind of thinking about that motivation piece. How can I use what is motivational to me now, a few weeks from now when things are getting a little stressful or a little tough? Am I motivated right now because I know that I'm only a year and a half away from getting my degree? Am I motivated because I'm setting a good example for a child in my life? Am I whatever that might be, whatever that looks like for you. Kind of make sure that that is in your mind, write it down on Post-it notes, share it with a friend. That way you have that motivation to kind of think about as things get a little bit more stressful. If they're not already stressful, the first couple of weeks are a little overwhelming, but we tend to see the motivation start to kind of go lower whenever it's like that midterm point of the semester. Okay, so we're going to talk about like resilience and grit. So grit is like that perseverance toward a goal or a task. So whenever you are faced with obstacles, how do you approach that? Do you keep going? Do you keep working toward that goal, toward that task? So your goal maybe on a semester basis is to pass your classes. What happens when you don't do well on an exam? Do you give up, or do you approach studying in a different manner? Do you go to a tutoring center? And this is kind of like over time as well. So this is like this grit table, if you will, things that are going to help you with grit, growth, looking for alternatives, different approaches. So again, if you don't do well in an assessment, what could you do differently? Your resilience, how are you going to approach that obstacles as they come up? Your instinct, are you trusting your gut to make the smart decisions? And then tenacity, how committed are you going to be to go over what you're going to try to achieve? Okay, so here are ways just kind of get grit, going after what interests you. So that comes back to a lot of times. I have students, usually like younger students, quickly out of high school or within a few years, say they're going for a certain major because that's what their parents want them to do, but they're not necessarily interested in it. That's going to present an issue right away because they're not personally interested in that field, and so therefore their motivation is going to be stopped. So pursuing what really does interest you is one great way to make sure you have that grit. Keep practicing, keep pushing yourself, find purpose, have hope, and then surround yourself with people that are going to have like a like-mindedness about being resilient and having that mindset of success and making you, be better or do better. So there is this gratification model, and I'll let you read a little bit more about this if you wish to look into like kind of these key themes as they relate to gratification. But these are good questions to start asking yourself. What is it that motivates you to learn something? So, and it doesn't matter how you answer that question. What motivates you? Well, I need to learn this because I have a test coming up I need to pass. That's okay. That can be a motivation, or it can be bigger picture. I need to learn this because I will use it in my career path. So kind of going through and seeing how you're motivated. What does that fulfill in terms of your needs? What are you going to achieve through certain learning activities, through, assessments or assignments? What are the things that you're going to incorporate into your learning activities to kind of help push you forward? So just questions to constantly be thinking about. Something else our textbook talks about is combating negative bias. And so there's something called the imposter syndrome that will be brought up kind of throughout different classes and chapters, where you might feel like you don't belong or you don't have the abilities to do certain things. You have doubts about why you can possibly be in a college environment. That's not unusual. It's very common. And so what we want to do is combat that negative bias. It's normal to be anxious. It's normal to be concerned. But when you start really just focusing over and over on those negative thoughts, that's definitely going to impede your ability to progress. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge the fact that you might have some negative bias toward yourself or toward your abilities. And then focus on the positive. Well, you're here, you are motivated, maybe you're dedicated, you have a good time management into play. Just focus on the things that you're doing really well. Focus on successes. Know that you're going to have some setbacks, but focus on those successes. Keep an accomplishment journal. Even if that journaling is not necessarily for you, whether you post it online or whether you just put it on a Post-it note or you just share it with someone, just kind of always surrounding yourself as positive as possible so that you are pushing those negative thoughts out. And it is about mindset, trying to make sure that you are keeping the right mindset that's going to help you continue to grow. So we're going to talk about growth mindset here for a few minutes and different kind of goals. So there's something called fixed versus growth mindset, and this can go back to that negative bias we were just done talking about. And I'm going to pick on math because a lot of people do tend to view math in a fixed mindset kind of way. Fixed mindset is saying something like, I'm no good at math and I never will be, right? That's a fixed mindset. Of course, you're never going to be good at math if you think that way. But if you have a growth mindset, it's more like, well, I'm not great at math now, but with more time, energy, work, whatever it might take, I can improve. It doesn't mean you're going to magically get better, but you can improve. So this is just examples of different fixed mindsets and then how you can kind of shift those to growth mindset. So it's just allowing yourself the possibility to not believe a stagnant, attitude about something. I am not good at math, therefore I'll never be good at math, or I'm not good at writing, I'll never. So allowing yourself to have that growth mindset really can help you combat that negative bias as well. The next section talks about learning styles. And so if you don't know your learning style, I encourage you to go to a site called vark-learn.com. And some of you may have already done this before. And you scroll down a little bit. There's a green, what is your learning preference? You'll close the ad. And then it's going to go through a series of questions. And it's going to ask you, what would you do in this situation? So you go through and you click, one, no more than two kind of matches for each scenario. And then when you're done, you'll hit OK. And it's going to give you a result. And I am going to just kind of pull up. Let's say, I know that I am a read-write person. So whenever you get your results, you're going to get some strategies. What does it mean, first of all, to be in this category of learning? What do they prefer? What's the best way to take in information? How do we present the information to other people? So it's just really helpful, especially early in the semester, trying to know what your preferences are. And there are different schools of thought. Some people believe there is no such thing as learning preferences, that everyone can learn every way possible. There are some people believe that we can only learn our specific learning preference. And then there's people in the middle, and I kind of fall in the middle, that yes, we all have the capability to learn in different ways, but we might really prefer to learn a certain way or two. So knowing your learning styles. And again, different learning styles, you have visual, you like to take in information, PowerPoints, color code, things that are going to help you see things in that visual format. Oral is where you can hear things. You might be listening to this lecture and you're good, or sitting in a classroom and listening to a lecture. You don't need to necessarily take a ton of notes. What our textbook doesn't necessarily talk a lot about is that read-write, which I think is really helpful. When you write your notes, you read text, you have headlines and subheadings and all those different things that are going to help you focus on the reading, writing aspect. And then kinesthetic is that hands-on. So it's helpful to know, again, early on what your learning preference is, and then take advantage of those strategies and employ them in the classroom as well as outside the classroom. This section does talk about, students with disabilities. So if there's like an academic disability, oftentimes students with different abilities kind of know their learning preferences because they know their strengths and their struggles as it relates to that. They know maybe that sitting and taking notes is not their strength, and so they need a note taker, so maybe they can focus more on listening during the lecture. So sometimes that can actually be beneficial. They know how they take information in, and then they can get assistance on those areas they know that they struggle in. So this section talks more about students with disabilities, and we do have a disability support service on campus. If you need more information about that, please reach out, and I'm happy to share that with you. Other things that go into our learning are different kind of like personality types. Our personality can impact the way that we learn things. One of the most well-known ones, I think, is the Myers-Briggs Personality, and that kind of connection between our personality and the way that we learn. And here are a lot of the most common types of personalities, and maybe you can see where you fall in between like these categories. Are you extroverted or introverted? Do you judge? Do you perceive? So where you fall in those, and how they do impact. So you want to make sure that your learning styles and your personality helps guide you, but it doesn't always 100% dictate, how you take in information or the courses that you take or the major that you go into, because then you also have that piece of interest, which we talked about a little bit already, like your motivation, your interest, things that you really enjoy. All of that plays a really big role. Another thing our chapter starts to kind of conclude on is things that are going to, again, assist in the learning process. Make mistakes safe. Knowing and acknowledging that learning does mean making mistakes. You're never going to write the perfect paper on the first draft. You're never going to get a 100% every single time on your math assessments. You're not going to read something 100% of the time all the way through and understand it perfectly. There are mistakes. There's room to grow in every subject area. So you want to try to allow yourself that grace. You want to manage your time. You want to try to connect things to the bigger picture with the course or your career path. All of that makes a big difference. And then we talk a little bit more about the hidden curriculum. This was brought up in chapter 1, understanding the invisible or hidden curriculum, those rules that are not necessarily always spoken, but we still have to know to be able to be a successful student. And then here are those questions, if you will, like the revisits of the questions. So I encourage you to look in chapter 2. Here is our text chapter. There's a little student profile, and again, like kind of go through here, especially focus in on the sections that maybe you struggle with the most. Maybe that motivation is something that you really tend to struggle with later in the semester, or maybe even now you're having some issues. And so you want to focus on that section on motivation and resilience and how to make sure that you are not losing those things early on and they sustain. Or maybe you need to learn more about learning styles and how you can apply learning styles or personality to your learning process, both in the classroom and at home. So again, I always encourage you, after you look at the PowerPoint, listen to the lecture, spend some time in the actual textbook, honing in on any of those particular sections that you just need to know a little bit more about. All right, be sure to come back and check out your assignment video that it correlates with this chapter. Until next time, bye.